So welcome back to part 2 of The Gap and the Gain. I actually want to start off with a quote by Dan Sullivan, who's one of the authors of this book. And this quote comes from the book, and he says, "The way to measure your progress is backward from where you started, not against your ideal." And that may feel counterintuitive or new to you, but that's actually the whole point of the book. You know, that one quote encapsulates the whole teaching of the book. And I'm going to use this video to break it down and actually get visual with it. I find that visual learning really helps the process along. So I'm going to share my screen here and do a little bit of drawing on the GoodNotes app. Don't be too critical of my drawing skills. They're like preschool level. So that's kind of where I'm at with my drawing abilities. So this is your brain. And another way that we could think about that is that it's your mindset. And what they're saying in The Gap and the Gain is that there's two operating systems. One is the gap, and one is the gain. So we'll go there, and we'll go there. And the way that we talk about this in Journey to You, in terms of these 10 habits that we're working with, is this is really easeful living. It's allowing yourself to orient towards the moment in a state of ease, rather than being in relationship to the moment in a state of stress, and in a way of being that's just like more stressful. So easeful living is really the mindset habit of gain thinking. And it can be helpful to come at things from a different angle. So if they're the same thing. So when you come at something from a different angle, you change your perspective around it, and that's going to help you change the way that you're thinking about something. And if you can change your thinking, you're golden. It's that thing of like, we can't solve the problem with the same thinking that created the problem. So the ability to have an open mindset, not a fixed mindset, and to be able to change your thinking can be incredibly valuable as you're working towards your goals. So on one side, like I mentioned, we have the gain. On the other side is the gap. And really the gap is like, it's the opposite. It's stressful living. And there's a few things that these have in common. So both of these operating systems also start with the ideal. And the ideal is going to go up there on both sides. Now we just took a moment in the last video and you created a really clear picture for yourself on the ideal. And it's probably like a multi-dimensional ideal. That feels fair to say. And we just took a moment in the last video and we created a really clear picture for ourselves on what the ideal is. And it's probably a multi-dimensional ideal. In that it involves body goals, perhaps, family, relationships, ambition, experience of time. So there's different dimensions to your ideal in terms of your daily flow, your daily calendar, how you feel, just what your life is like. Now, similarly, there's also this, the start is the same on both of these sides. We'll just make those look as symmetric as possible. So we're 5 weeks out from January 1, or if you're watching this video at a different time, you have your future date. And I would really actually give yourself a specific date, know the exact date in your mind. And what we did is we visualized the movement from here to the ideal. And we did that very intentionally. And as a matter of fact, even if you are watching these videos back to back, let's go ahead and visualize once again. I really want you to to set this in and do a mental rehearsal so that the ideal becomes very clear. So look back at your list of notes that you took down, and I want you to visualize that reality. Like, see it in your mind's eye. And the interesting thing about visualization is you may bring in your other senses here. So you might bring in inner sight. You might bring in inner feeling. Let your eyes close if that's comfortable for you, and notice in this mental rehearsal of you in your ideal state, 5 weeks out, 2 months out, 6 months out, whatever it is for you. Notice what you're doing. Notice what your calendar looks like. Are you on vacation? What will you have done? So in order to let this really sink in, let's go ahead and revisit the visualization process. Even if you just practiced and are watching these videos back to back, it's going to be helpful to just let this really sit in. So have your list nearby that you took your notes on. And I'm going to keep saying January 1 because that's what we're working with currently. Again, if you're watching this video in the future, just replace that date with whatever date that you're working with. But I would invite you to make it very specific. So with your eyes closed and your list nearby, I want you to start, visualizing that ideal. And if you need to open your eyes and look at the list again, feel free to do so. But start really seeing the ideal in your mind's eye. You may bring in some of your other senses, inner sight, inner feeling. And really in this mental rehearsal, because that's exactly what it is, we're starting to create some of the plasticity and the circuitry in terms of our neural networks that will eventually tap into once the ideal comes into fruition. Notice what you're doing. Notice what your calendar looks like. If you're working with January 1st as your date, you might be on vacation on January 1st. So what will you have done by the time you're on vacation? What's on your mind? And similarly, what's not on your mind because it's already taken care of? What you feel like, what's in your refrigerator, what kind of foods are you stocking up on, what you've been up to lately in your habits. So again, we're really just like spending time on the ideal. And now in this process of visualization or mental rehearsal, call it whatever you'd like, you're making it real in your body. And you're giving the cells of your body a vision, and you're gonna like breathe into it. So it's like, yeah, I can do this. Like you're really believing in it. This is a very important piece of this, getting established in that vision. Because what we're moving through here is an identity evolution. So you're actually letting your identity expand into the moving target of your next ideal, your identity evolution. And when you're ready, you can go ahead and open up your eyes again. So we've just visualized this, right? We've just visualized the ideal. And remember, it's the same ideal on either side. I haven't actually dropped the big distinction between the two yet. You may anticipate what it was. Because this is where it gets interesting, to me at least, is how we achieve and how we start moving towards the ideal. So say we start moving towards the ideal that we've achieved something just by definition of having moved towards it. And this is where Dan Sullivan's experience in coaching entrepreneurs, for example, got really interesting. He found that the way that people are continually successful and the way that people play the game of life and have more success over time, the way that they measure is from where they've started to what they've achieved. And this is what they measure. So what are they measuring? they're measuring the progress towards their vision, towards their ideal, towards their next ideal. They're measuring what's already been achieved based on where they started. Now, when people are in stressful thinking, stressful living, they measure what they've achieved to the ideal, not from where they started. So what they're actually measuring is, you guessed it, the gap, as opposed to the gain. They're measuring the gap between what they've achieved already and their ideal, rather than measuring the gain, which is where they started, which for us would be today. That's where we're at right now, where we're starting towards the ideal. So now is where it gets really nuts. Because we start to look at, in terms of, at least like emotional inflammation, because can you kind of see how like this and this are qualities of emotion? Let me pick a different color for those. Like that's an emotional quality, stress, and similarly, ease, we'll make it blue, is an emotional quality. And in terms of emotional inflammation, which seems to have the same biomarkers as physical inflammation, meaning that the cells in your body experience inflammation the same whether you're eating a bunch of junk food or you're in gap thinking, which is kind of crazy, is that on the gap side, we have stress in a negative sense. So there's actually stress on both sides. I should point that out. We have stress as a negative stressor, which we would call distress. And then we have stress on the other side as a positive stressor. And we call that eustress. Funny thing about stress is it's so necessary to our life experience. We wouldn't be alive if we didn't have stress. Stress is actually the thing that provides the adversity for us to bump up against so that we can grow and develop. Whether you're simply talking about your muscle tissue, when you go to a gym or when you go take a yoga class, you're stressing your tissues and then you're letting them rest. And that's the fundamental theory of growth. And so stress is unavoidable. But if you can orient towards stress with a positive spin and with an orientation of ease, and tap more into this quality of like eustress versus the quality of distress, it's a lot less taxing. It's a lot less taxing psychologically. It's a lot less taxing physiologically. And you're probably going to move towards your goal more in a state of ease as opposed to a state of stress. All right. And so the mind is experiencing distress and the body is also experiencing distress if we're in gap thinking, because the mind is in the body. So over on this side, on the right, we're seeing the gains. We're doing new things. We're doing hard things to make our ideal come into a reality. And so we're seeing the stress is positive, and that's called eustress, like I just mentioned. So it's like, I'm going to do the hard thing because it's what I want to achieve, because it's bringing me to my goal, because it's my ideal. And so I see that as a positive. And it's not like, oh my God, there's so much to do and I'm getting nothing done. I'm not getting anywhere towards my goal. And you're not getting anywhere because you're measuring against the ideal. You're not measuring from where you started or the progress that you've made. And what I really like about this now is it goes into the research that BJ Fogg does out of Stanford in his book, Tiny Habits. So in Journey to You, we talk about this a lot with the tiny habits, is that we take these tiny steps from where we start towards where we are. So there's a whole part of Journey to You where we look at the tactics of habit evolution. And one of the main tactics that we use in habit evolution is Kaizen, which just means a small incremental approach. So there's little things that you can do that are going to move you towards your gain, especially when you reflect back on what you did. Because what happens is this ideal, it gets big. It can get huge. And when you're measuring against the ideal, you're getting into a negative stress state. And so looking back over here to the bottom left, what are some of the feelings that come out of the negative stress state? But overwhelm, feelings of failure, ultimately, or like not doing enough. And that's oftentimes frustrating. So we'll say frustration because it never seems like you can get enough done. And then that tends towards disappointment. So, and I invite you as you're listening to all this to really be honest with yourself. Like, how much are you in gain thinking versus gap thinking? And you might need to spend some time with that because it's thinking that actually goes on more behind the scenes. It's more of a feeling sense of like, do we feel frustrated? Do we feel behind? Do we feel like we're not doing enough? And unfortunately, what all that tends towards is depression, guilt, perhaps, like I'm not making enough progress now, so I'm feeling guilty for not making enough progress. Now, the emotions on the other side, because we're measuring against where we started, we notice success. That's fun. Like I'm really letting myself feel successful, and I'm not feeling like a failure because I'm actually getting somewhere. Because I've seen now, bam, each of those steps. That's why I made them different colors, because you can really differentiate what and where you were with each of the steps. And so they should feel fairly tangible. So there's a satisfaction that also comes from this. I'm satisfied because I did something. I made a difference, and I'm in alignment with my ideal. And that's when I can breathe in that satisfaction and experience a level of satiation where it's like, oh yeah, I did this. And I did it in a way that's aligned with a higher order in life. I'm playing by universal laws and I'm imbibing my own progress. And so what this actually does is it builds confidence. Confidence to actually believe in the ideal. Because what happens with so many people, I think, is like they're scared to even think about what the ideal is because they don't believe it's a possibility. So the confidence is going to be a big part of this. Confidence to actually believe in the ideal, and confidence to maybe even set an ideal that's beyond what we've been able to set for ourselves before. And I think Journey to You people, you're really seeing that now. It's like you may be setting goals and expectations and ideals for yourself that extend beyond what you would have set as a goal or an ideal for yourself before, because you know more is possible and you believe more in your potential and you have that confidence in your potential. And so what all this tends to is higher self-esteem. Higher self-esteem because there's a small incremental change in movement that you can trust that moves you towards achievement and allows you to have confidence in your actions. So you feel good about yourself. You feel good about what you have accomplished today. And again, I'll just ask you, like, think about this honestly. When you're going to bed at night, do you go to bed actually feeling good about what you accomplished today? Or are you more on the gap side where it's like, I'm frustrated. I never seem to get done what I set out to do. So on the side of the positive stressors, once again, because there's all these experiences that we just talked about, we get joy. We get joy and we get optimism. And all of this, it really has a tremendous effect on how you feel. Often people find over time that easeful living, it's like I was talking about in the beginning, it's one of the most advanced habits. And so this framework, I think it really gives us an opportunity to evaluate, am I in a stressful relationship towards my own life? Or am I in an easeful relationship to my own life? So we're either running in one operating system or the other. And we could bounce back and forth, but like in a game, if there's a close match, who's going to win? So I want to finish with the quote that I started with. Dan Sullivan: "The way to measure your progress is backward from where you started, not against your ideal." If you're in the habit of measuring yourself against your ideal, get into gain thinking. Hopefully this chart helped you. Not measuring your progress back from your ideal, but rather measuring progress from where you start. So one thing I want us to do right now is I want you to make a list of like where you're starting and what your ideal is, and try to just get like, I don't know, 3 to 5 and where you're starting. So your ideal, like I'm looking at some income goals for my next quarter. I know exactly what they are, so I could put the exact dollar amount right here. It's somewhere in the realm of like $30,000, which is definitely me extending my ideal way past anything I've ever idealized or thought about before. And I have to also acknowledge that like where I'm starting is like half of a dollar sign, right? I'm not there yet. So it's the ideal. And I want you to have a list of all 5 things in either column, 3 to 5 things. And what this is going to turn into. So this is very important. Pause the video right here if you need to take more time. Get this list very clear for yourself. Like if you run a business, you should be able to say, okay, I have these projects, on the go. These things are moving. These things are in completion. Maybe this is something with a relationship. Maybe it's something that you've stated or some project that you've started in your own life or at home. Totally up to you, but get very specific about it. And you should be able to acknowledge where you're starting versus where the ideal is that you're working towards.